Good evening, everyone. Tonight, we have a special guest, the man who puts the soul into Soulfinders, Doug Ernst.
Hey, how's it going, man?
It's been, I think about 3 years. It's been quite a while.
Yeah, time has definitely flown by. It feels like you blink and suddenly like 3 to 5 years has gone by.
Um, and in that time, Soulfinder has done nothing but increased in popularity. Uh, I would say that the storylines are more complex than what we saw at the beginning. Um, how do you feel things have progressed? Are they like going the way you want? Do you like it's good, but I want this or that for it?
Yeah, so early on, I mean, there was a learning curve. So when I first did Demon's match with Timothy Lim in 2019 and going back earlier with the script and all that, like 2018, I was still working at the newspaper. So I was being pulled in all sorts of different directions. So then I was starting this project and there was a learning curve involved in not just like writing comics, but like managing teams, figuring out budgets and printing and all this sort of stuff. So um, I had to get through that learning curve. And then it's just a matter of like the more you work with people. So then I started working with Matt Weldon. Every time you work with someone on a project, the longer you're together, you kind of mesh better. You know how to get the best out of that person in terms of the creative overall vision. And I don't know. So it's one of those things where Matt and I always like kind of got along and kicked it off really well. But at the same time, it's like, you're a little nervous at first about throwing ideas out there and like, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? Are they going to be like receptive to this? And how does this person just work best? And how do I show them that I appreciate their talent? And so with each progressive book, it's like I feel like we gel more and more, and so that it just makes things easier.
Hmm. Um, have you? Also one thing that interests me is, you guys kind of sort of have an iconic verse with you and Tim Lim, Mark Pellegrini, and I believe coming up soon, maybe Eric Canetti stuff, maybe not. But how has taking what originally started, when we were in demon match territory, Soulfinder was very, I would say, serious. But then you have like Common America, which is and Black Hops, which are very different tonally. Has com- Finding ways to combine them into a series, has that changed the way you feel at all about Soulfinder and Father Redder?
No, because with the crossover, Tim and Mark nailed it, in my opinion. And I think overall, if you asked Common America readers and Black Hops readers what they thought of the crossover, from what I've seen, people are like, I wasn't sure if this is going to work at all, how you were going to like put this together, but Tim and Mark pulled it off, and for the most part, so they worked with me since the ground floor of Demons Match, so they know the characters insanely well. And I just knew that if Tim and Mark did it, they would do the characters justice. And they would, like run things by me and like, what do you think about this? Is this cool? We didn't do anything weird, did we? And I was like, no, man, you have a blank check to basically do whatever you want because you always nail it, in my opinion. So, and then the other thing is, you don't need to read any of the crossover books or anything in order to understand the proper books or whatever. So it's just like all of my stories are standalone stories, but they're all interconnected. And then it's like, if you want a fuller picture of things, then you could go to the crossover and you could check it out. And then if you don't, if for some reason somebody didn't like the tone in the crossover books, you could basically dismiss it as like, I don't want to count that as canon or whatever you want to do, and just be like, I don't consider that real Soulfinder or something. Like, I don't care, like that's up to you. But we wrote it in a way where if you do like it, it does all connect together.
Hmm. Um, Would you say at all that you sort of saw a different side of Father Redder after that? In the beginning, he's pretty dour. He's very serious, down to earth. Uh, if you found maybe like he has a little bit of a humorous side in him.
Yeah, so with the crossover that Tim and Mark did, it was cool because in my books, he's dealing with at least so far people that are pretty put together, and he's being mentored by Father Crane, and all of the guys are just pretty like, sharp dudes, and they have their life together for the most part. They have their own problems or whatever, but for the most part they have their life together. And then with the crossover, you got to see more of his military like leadership capabilities because he was thrown into a group of the misfit groups of people where they're just all over the place. It's like herding cats,
Hmm.
and they have their like dysfunctional personalities, and so he needs to find a way to herd all these people and get them to focus on the mission and do what they're supposed to do. So Tim and Mark were able to show his his logistical and military sort of leadership skills, which I wasn't really able to do as much in Soulfinder because it just the mission or the story didn't call for that at the time.
Hmm. So you mentioned Matt Weldon, who's turning in fantastic pencils. I mean, that guy gets better every year. Um, how has working with him affected your writing of the book? Do you find yourself like consulting with him, like sort of going back and forth, or do you sort of like now you sort of write scenes like, oh, I know Matt's really good at this. I'll put a scene of that thing in there.
Yeah, so I know that Matt's a pro Second Amendment guy, and so he knows all sorts about weapons and firearms and guns, which works perfectly with Soulfinder because they're all combat vets. So I know that I can just throw in real weapons. I could throw the saw in there, and he's gonna just, Tim could do it too, but Matt really like loves all this sort of stuff. So any sort of military hardware, I could throw that at him. And the more that I throw at him and he exceeds my expectations, then I'm just like, I'm just gonna keep pushing it. I'm gonna challenge this guy. Where is this guy's where the boundaries of his comfort zone? Does he even have the end of the comfort zone so I could push him out of that to see? So I just keep throwing more and more and more out, and he always just nails it. So I'm just like, okay, well, if he could do that, let's see if he could do this. And like so I basically am blessed in that I have the freedom to just write all sorts of insane things and then say like, I trust your judgment. You are a creative genius in my mind, so have at it. And so it's a running joke that Matt sort of he's sort of like this whale type character that goes to the bottom of the ocean and then he brings up treasure eventually when he comes up for air. And so Matt will take the script, and I mean, if he has questions, he'll ask me or whatever. But for the most part, he just sort of like goes to the depths. And then I don't know where he is. He's doing his other stuff. He's doing stuff with like Final Fight now and Udon and all of that. So
Nice.
it's like he'll come back and he'll just be like, "Hey, Doug." Like I went to a show once and he just like threw, I don't know, like a quarter of Infinite Ascent at me, like finished art, and it was gorgeous. And I was like, what? I wasn't even sure if you had done a page yet. But it looks like you're basically, well into this. So like, that's awesome. Very cool. So yeah, I just write the script, and if he has questions, he'll get to me. But for the most part, I just trust him, and he does his thing. He does his Matt Weldon thing, and it's awesome.
Excellent. So, since he likes doing the military stuff, you ever like throw something in that's really kind of obscure and like, oh, let's see if you can find this.
It's not so if I put anything in there, I always will put in hyperlinks
Ah,
to the pages. I will find like a documentary on something, and I'll be sending him all sorts of YouTube links, and I'll send him wherever it is. I make sure that I have like visual references for him or historical things. And so with Soulfinder Tunnel Hounds, it was all sorts of Vietnam stuff based on the Tuttle Rats. So I was making sure there was all sorts of hyperlinks where he didn't have to do the homework. It was the onus is on me to make sure either I know it and I give it to him, or I do the homework and give it to him. So all he has to do is look, see the reference. If he wants to, he could look into it more and get a feel for stuff, but he doesn't have to. And so my job is to make his job as easy as possible.
Hmm. So now with the fourth edition, Tunnel Hounds, you are sort of stepping back in time into Soulfinder history a little bit. Um, and I find it kind of interesting because I know you and I, when we were young, Vietnam was like 10 years past, but for younger people now, it's like how we would have thought of World War II time wise.
Right.
So what made you want to go back to Vietnam for this?
So it was one of those things. I have the main characters. So there's Father Redder, Father Crane, Detective Chua, and people got to know all of these characters. But you see Father Crane as an old man, and I was like, okay, it would be nice from a character development point of view to see the pivotal moment in this guy's life that changed the trajectory of his life and made him, brought him to faith, and ultimately he became a priest and a soul finder or whatever. So I can build his character in better ways by going to the past than by just consistently just doing like, okay, he's whatever he is, and he's in his 70s now or whatever, but he's a fit guy in his 70s. But I like those moments in life when you look back and you can be like, that was a crossroads, that was a very clear crossroads, and when this happened to me, it changed me, it fundamentally changed me and changed the trajectory of my life. So for me, it was like I read Thomas Sowell as a young man, and I read Basic Economics. And so as I've gotten older, I'm like, that's totally changed my life. He doesn't know it, but Thomas Sowell, an economist, completely changed the direction of my life by reading his book. So with Father Crane, it was like I was sent on this mission. I wasn't particularly religious. I was agnostic, atheist, whatever. Suddenly there's this priest embedded in our team, and I see all this supernatural stuff that tells me, oh, it's real. There really is good and evil. Satan is real. Demons are real. God is real. And now I have to completely, rethink everything. And I've realized that no, the physical wars that we are fighting, they're just manifestations of spiritual failures. So the real war, if I'm a soldier, if I can do it, is I want to become a priest and I want to battle on the spiritual battlefield, because I believe that is the most important battle that we need to face.
And was there something intrinsic with Vietnam that you find was really sort of on that spiritual plane, or was it more like that aligns with the lifetime of Father Crane?
Well, in Demon's Match, it's quickly referenced that he was in Vietnam, so I knew that if I was going to go back, I have to explore that. And I just had a thing where I liked the tunnel rats, and
Hmm.
I liked the guys that go in and crawl into darkness, and there's booby traps, and there's poisonous scorpions, and there's grenades, and there's poisonous snakes, and all sorts of other things. And so I was just like, all right, those are the guys. The person that becomes a soul finder, it would make sense. Not all soul finders, obviously, but I want to show that Crane, he's the man. He was willing to do stuff that other people really did not want to do. Even in a war, he volunteered to crawl into the darkness and with all of these dangers. And that's the kind of guy that he was. And so it would show that he had the mettle, once he became a priest, to become a soul finder. So it allowed me to just like entertain my own, I don't know, the interests in the tunnel rats, make up my own as the tunnel hounds. It's like they exist in the same universe, but they're kind of like their own team or whatever. So it's like I got to educate myself and do that, but also at the same time it allowed me the creative outlet to further build up Crane's character.
Hmm. Um, And so joining Father Crane is one Father Lancaster Blatty,
Mhm.
who should be well known to common America fans, I should say. Um, how how did that come about? That you decided to make what seemed like just kind of like a fat bald priest into like he was really a badass hunting demons.
So that was another one of those things where I told Tim and Mark years ago, if you guys ever want to do anything with Soul Finders, you have a blank check. You helped me from the start. So I will always be grateful for that. And I trust you guys, and you guys are awesome. So whatever. And so they kind of planted the seeds that he had been a soul finder. And that was sort of a little bit of a creative curveball that they threw their own audience. And people are like, what is this like friendly old jolly guy? But he was in Vietnam, and so it was planted that he did have that past, but they didn't explore it. So then I was like, okay, well, I have this story. Do you care if I just incorporate Blatty into the Tunnel Hounds? And they were like, yeah, man, go for it. We haven't really explored his past. If you want to do it, then go for it. So same process as when they did their crossover. I wrote the script and then sent it to Tim and Mark. And I was like, let me know if there's anything you find objectionable here. If I drop the ball in any way, if I'm doing anything that you just think is not right. And I will figure out a way to creatively, work it into the script, but also make you guys cool with it. And so, yeah, they were fine with it. And we just went from there.
Hmm. So, one of the things that really kind of has struck me about the Soul Finder series is usually when people want to do a religious book, they'll pick sort of like the low hanging fruits, like they'll have 7 chapters for the 7 deadly sins, or maybe they'll do like different levels of hell for Dante's Inferno and stuff. But one of the things that has struck me is that a lot of stuff like putting Blackfire aside for a second, a lot of things that the human characters have to contend with that comes off as so deadly is things like despair,
Mm.
and like a lust, for power, money, or whatever. um what what made you sort of decide to go off on your own path for those things versus like following like 7 deadly sins or something?
Yeah, so to me, all the books, there has to be a certain I have to be invested in the idea. So it's just one of those things where, no, how should I say this? With Demon's Match, I was like, okay, I'm doing this religious book. I have priests, and I know that there's going to be people that are like skeptical about why you're doing this. And so I was like, I want to just head on uh, ask that question that is on every the atheist mind, or again, it's a universal question: why do bad things happen to good people? So I wanted to go after a hard question right from the get-go, and so that is a challenge in a way. So there was that one, but then as you go on with the books, with the second book, I wanted to kind of talk about using your friends, family, and loved ones to and get out of the abyss of hopelessness and despair and things like that, leaning on each other, praying for each other, and things like that. So that was what was just interesting, interesting to me at the time. And I was reading a lot of St. John of the Cross, so so it just worked well. And then the third book, I wanted to do, I wanted to tell a story where accomplishing the mission, the hero could only accomplish the mission if forgiveness was the key. Because I can't think of a comic that I've ever read where like the key to everything was you got to forgive the person in your life who hurts you the most, or something like that. It would be like a Spider-Man Green Goblin, and I don't even know what it would be, but it would just be like, no, Peter, you have to forgive this person that hurt you the absolute most, or whatever. And if you can't do it, then everything fails or whatever. And so that was what interested me at the time. And then with Tunnel Hounds, I was like, okay, what do I want to explore with this one? I want to talk about what it's like to leave your family and kind of come into your own as your own man, and the tensions and juggling your responsibilities to your family back home, but then what happens when you have responsibilities to men that are under your command, and you would give your life for them, but then you obviously, your mom and dad want you to be home and safe and close to them or whatever, but you're like, no, I have to tread my own path, or whatever, even if that means giving my life for somebody else, or something along those lines. So I don't know. With each book, it's just whatever is really interesting to me at the time. That's where what I follow.
Yeah, it's interesting to me that I think that those are a lot of issues that, especially people who served in those really long years between, 9/11 and until we finally left Afghanistan. Um, and I think in history, there's so many similarities with religion and, um, in people's responsibility to God, to the church, to each other, and having to balance those things out. But we don't really get to see a lot of that in movies and TVs. There's always like, oh, I gotta do it for my brothers, and this and that, and just like a very simplified or surface version. But we don't really get to see like how much it must weigh on the individual person to make those kind of choices. Why do you think that in most media we don't get uh, really flushed out characters?
Yeah, so I could unpack that one for a while, but I think a lot of writers in mainstream comics, I mean, you can tell the interesting thing about social media, the digital, Twitter age and YouTube, is you get to see in many respects, even though it's just a slice, I know, but you can see a lot of people. So you can see that a lot of these individuals that are writing for movies or comics or whatnot, they are often very hostile to men of faith. And if they are not interested in the cardinal virtues, if they're not interested in prudence and justice and fortitude and temperance and all these sort of faith, hope, and charity, if they're not invested in those things, if that's not at the forefront of their mind, if they're just these people that are almost like aimlessly going through life, but they're tasked with writing heroic characters, or even religious characters, and they don't sympathize or even have empathy for people that are of faith, then it's going to be a lot harder for them to tell those tales. So it's like, yeah, you're tasked with writing heroic characters, but you don't know the first thing about heroism. You're tasked with writing about virtue, but you don't care about virtue, like real virtue. Like
Mhm.
you want people to just think you're kind of a good guy in the general sense or whatever, but you haven't really dug deep into a lot of these issues. And I would say another thing with writing, if you want to resonate with people as a writer, you really need to do an examination of conscience of yourself. You need to make yourself vulnerable. You need to really think about, like, where do I need work? If you want to write a story about love, like real love, true love, you got to ask yourself, what does that mean? What is the real definition of love? And then how do I properly love my fellow man? And am I doing a good job? Maybe I'm not. And then you have to look at, like, where are my shortcomings? And I feel like a lot of writers, if you look at their social media feeds, they think they're little gods. They think they're little perfect people. They think
Mhm.
that they're just like the example for everybody. They don't have any work. And so if you think that you are the bee's knees, the end all be all or whatever, it's really hard to write vulnerable characters if you yourself can't even find your own vulnerable spots. If you can't go into your room as a writer and strip yourself spiritually naked and look at yourself and look at your flaws, and then figure out an appropriate way to channel that what you learn about yourself into the stories. Sorry, I'm rambling. So I don't
No,
know.
no,
I could
no,
just keep going
no,
on and on and on. So
no, I think you're onto something, and I think it's very interesting that, I agree. It's even in well, this is a problem for me with most modern media, even getting outside of religion, um, which is people who are writing seem to be very self-interested
Mm,
because they cannot write relationship between two people. Like even an interpersonal relationship that's like between let's say two male friends, it has to devolve into like there's some sort of sexual attraction,
right.
or it's like a cartoony like bro fest.
Mhm.
um there's none of like a traditional relationship that I think you find it a lot more in the military because there is a lot of like, I need this guy to make sure I don't die. But you used to see it a lot more in average everyday life when communities were stronger and like, I need my neighbors to help me out. I need my friends to back me up for this and for that. Um, like the people writing to me seem very insular, and it, something in them almost seems stunted where it's like more than just that, but it's like you said, like they have it's like they don't know how to take heroism. If you're looking, like you have to accomplish a bunch of Herculean tasks in order to marry like the princess or something. Like they you they don't seem to be able to draw something out of themselves where they've worked really hard to overcome or accomplish something. And it's just weird how flat a lot of things seem to me. It's like I know what the idea of working hard is, but I can't express actually working hard.
Yeah, and I just think, how do I say this? A lot of what you see, whether it's in Hollywood or mainstream comics or whatnot, there is good stuff here or there or whatever, but oftentimes it's a reflection of the culture. If you have a soft culture, if
Hmm.
everybody is living, very comfortable lives, and they could go to Starbucks every day, and they could do whatever, and they're just fine with their internet, and they're just bopping along and watching TV or streaming or Netflix or whatever. And if you live rather mundane lives, and you're not into pushing yourself, whether intellectually or spiritually or physically, and you're just kind of like, it's going to reflect in your writing. So even if you're someone who goes to the gym and you push yourself to your limits, you're going to learn a lot about yourself that you could then incorporate into stories about people that are pushing themselves
Hmm.
to their limits. But if you don't ever leave your house and you just sit on your couch all day, you're not going to learn about, what when I'm digging deep and I think there's nothing left, like if you really push yourself, you'll find like there's always something left down there and then so it's like the person that doesn't push themselves in any way possible, any facet of their being, you're just going to have these very shallow, relationships, and I don't know, the expectations just keep getting lower and lower because as more and more of the population is that way, the expectations are not very high. Then people that do have higher expectations, they're sitting there watching it like, what is this? Like, this is heroism to you in 2024? This is silly. This is not heroism. This is bad. And then they get mad at you because you
You
shine a
pointed out.
spotlight. You're like a mirror showing them like all of their own flaws, and they get mad and take it personal. And I mean, actually, on some level, I feel bad. I shouldn't even say I feel bad. It's like maybe you should take it personally. Like if you I don't know. I'll let you go from there because like I said, I could just kind of go forever, and I'll just irritate more and more people.
Do you think it's a generational thing? Like maybe because a lot of the people who are writing professionally now are sort of around our age. They're late Xers into like the middle range of millennials. Do you think it's something with that time, maybe that whole time of peace, we weren't at war with anyone and internet came out? Whereas I, to me, like Gen Z, Gen Alpha may be different.
Yeah. Well, I think of when I was growing up. I I grew up in this interesting time where it was like you were young enough to adopt the cool technology as it came
Mhm.
online, but you're old enough to live in a time where your parents kicked you out of the house every day and we're like, we'll see you when the street lamps come on. And that's when like whenever the street lamps come on, that's basically when I got to go home for the night or whatever. You could see a little bit, you could push it because eventually your mom would yell for you or someone would be like, Douglas, or whatever, and you'd hear it. And so you were out and you were doing some sort of Goonies type adventure with the neighborhood kids. And you're like, when I was a kid, there was like cornfields and creeks, and we would do stuff where we would be like, let's just keep following the creek as long as we can and see where it goes. And like so we just disappear for like hours just walking and walking and like going, and eventually you'd be like, we've get scared, and then you got to like walk back or whatever. But I feel like those are adventures that a lot of kids these days, like your parents might get in trouble with the authorities for like child neglect, or I don't even know,
Yeah.
endangerment or something. Like we were just like 8 years old, like
No one cared.
following creeks for like miles or I don't know. And I don't know. I feel like that sort of stuff really affects you. And if you're just always online playing online video games and nobody kicks you out of the house, or maybe they don't even want you to go out of the house because it's dangerous
Mhm.
or something like I don't know. Like I feel like that does have an effect on people.
Um, so just in terms of generationals, do you think that the kids growing up now, let's say teenagers now, do you think this is the best time or the worst time? And the reason I ask this is so in my other life, I teach, kung fu and some medicine courses and stuff. And I teach in Brazil. And the last time I was there, they're like, "Oh, it's so hard to get girls," and because some of them are very wealthy, but some of them are very, very poor, very low income communities. And they're like, "Oh, we can't do this. We're not going to be as great as the grandmaster and this or that." And I tell them, no, this is the best time ever for you because the bar is so low. You just have to be a little awesome. You don't even have to be really awesome. You just have to be better than those other guys, which just means this much. So, do you think this is like, do you think we're going to see a lot of great works coming out of people from this generation? Or do you think, like, oh, no, not?
Yeah, I think it's one of those things where you just see a widening gap between like people that are, filled with sloth and they're just going through the motions of life, and they're spiritual driftwood or whatever they are. And then you have people who are going to take advantage of the technology that we have, but maybe um they come from functional families and who teach them proper work ethics and things like that, and so they have drive and they have motivation, and you will just see this like almost like widening gap between just people that are totally dysfunctional, and then people that are you have so much knowledge at your fingertips and so it's interesting that you have people that are like very, very knowledgeable, because in a click you could get information that you would never be able to get, like, even just a couple decades ago. And then other people are awash in information and they actually are dumber, and they don't know anything for any number of reasons. So, yeah, I think, but that's the weird thing too, is if the culture at large doesn't appreciate good writing or, solid art, if it doesn't appreciate beauty, then you'll just have small pockets almost of people that do appreciate good writing and beautiful art and things like that, and the rest will just be watching whatever the lowest common denominator stuff that's just churned out by, they'll probably be entertained by like AI TV shows
Yeah.
or something like that and be like, this is the greatest thing ever, but it's just for like people that are on autopilot, and you're like, so I don't know, something along those lines, who knows.
Hmm. Um, so before we had spoken the first time, I had bought Soulfinder Demons Match, and one of the things that struck me as interesting about it was a religious book in the sense that it had a lot of religious themes. It had characters who were religious, and it didn't suck. Most modern media that has uh, any type of religious theme, really, generally they suck. And in a lot of cases, I'm thinking of you get like these Christian movies and stuff like that, and they're just so painful to watch. And even when I can see, like, well, they wanted to portray these values that are important to them, but they just couldn't get the job done. What do you think it really takes to make a book that has religious themes and characters hit? Like, what does it take to make that? Um, to some extent, you need a little sugar to make the medicine go down. You know what I mean? How does that work for you?
Yeah, so I do not like those movies where it's totally ham-fisted and it's basically preaching to the choir more than anything. So I like to write stories that are informed by my faith, but it's not preachy in any way. So with Soulfinder, I wanted to. That's the thing is like if story and character come first, and everything is meant to serve the story and serve the character, but you're well read in all sorts of issues. Like I was saying earlier, if you are thinking about the cardinal virtues and you're thinking about the theological virtues and you really kind of know this sort of stuff, and you in your spare time you're doing research, you can figure out a way where you're how do I say it? Like getting the broader message across, and people that want to dig down into it, they'll be like, "Oh, this is what's driving this guy." But people that just want to at a cursory level, it'll only sink in almost like a subconscious level. I try to write things where no matter how deep you kind of drill down, you're going to get more and more into it. So if you just want uh, to read about guys who are facing against demonic cobras or demonic spiders or demonic scorpions, and that's all you care about, then hopefully like you'll be entertained or whatever. But if you like start digging down, you're like, okay, this is a Latin prayer. Some people will just be like, oh, it's a Latin prayer, blah blah blah, priests do that. Other people will be like, let me Google this and see if it's a real prayer. Oh, it's a real prayer for the laity. Oh, it's actually real. So I just try and write it multi-layered, and so that way people that if you try and like if they feel you're trying to preach to them or you're trying to manipulate them or whatever, a large audience will recoil immediately, and they will want nothing to do with you. So I'm just trying to write really fun, cool stories that ultimately undergirding everything is my faith is what's directing it. I don't know if that answered your question or not,
Yeah,
but
no, no. Um, so I lived in China from 2006 to 2010. And one of the interesting things to me is, it had been a communist, basically atheist country for 50 some years at that point. And you would see a lot of people who really had a spiritual craving. Now, there was a huge underground Christian movement, at least at that time. There's been development since then. And I saw a lot of people getting renewed interest in Buddhism and Taoism. Um, do you think in a society like ours that we are going to see a general sort of spiritual hunger, at least in the entertainment department, where people are going to want more of these religiously flavored uh, movies and books and comics?
yeah, that's interesting because if you go to statistics, off the top of my head, I can't be like, oh, Yale,
Mm,
blah, a lot of research or whatever. But you'll see that people, even though when they drift away from organized religion, there's this growing number of people that are like spiritual but not religious or
Mm-hmm.
whatever. And so to me, it shows that like it, even if you're not Catholic or you're Muslim or Buddhist or whatever, there is a deep human yearning in the heart that people have that lends itself to the spiritual. And getting to your previous question, that's where I try to find these sort of like almost like universal questions that people ask. And it doesn't matter whether you're whatever your faith is or no faith or whatever, you're still gonna have an experience where you have to separate from your father and become your own man.
Mm-hmm.
So or you're going to ask like, why did my kid get leukemia? Why did my kid get cancer? Why did my sister get brain cancer? Who knows? Like these are the so for me, it's like, yeah, that people will have these deep questions that they want answered, or trials and tribulations that they have to go through. And the spiritual element is always there. It's just really, are you a good enough writer to articulate what they're feeling in their heart, but they can't put into words because they've never even, maybe they've never read the Bible, or maybe they've never gone to whatever the denomination is, what mass or,
Mm-hmm.
church or anything like that. So it's like a lot of people, they have these feelings, they have these yearnings that they don't understand, and they are looking to fill that vacuum or whatever in their heart. And so yeah, as a writer, it's your job to be able to articulate what's going on and almost point them in the right direction. But like I said, you don't want to like a ham-fisted thing.
Yeah.
And if they feel like you're just like, hey, you should be a Catholic because blah, 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 or whatever, they're going to be like, nope, see you later. I don't want anything to do with you. Bye, or whatever. So you got to do it in a subtle, professional, appropriate way.
So when you write, do you use C.S. Lewis's pyramid? In his book Mere Christianity, he came up with a pyramid of how you get to. In his case, it was, I believe, Anglicanism, but the bottom of the pyramid, the bottom layer was you have to be a good person. Second layer would be you have to be a spiritual person. The third layer would be, and this would switch depending on what religion you are, but for him it was the third layer was Christianity, and then the pinnacle of that would have been Anglicanism. Do you ever sort of consider that when you're writing and like, oh, I want this, I want to make sure I'm like hitting this area of the pyramid or that area?
I mean, I definitely have Mere Christianity right on my shelf over there, and I read it in its entirety. But so if it's affecting me, it's at a subconscious level. Actually, before I like even came on, I was talking about the things that you read matter, and it's going into your subconscious, and your subconscious is like this oceanic soup of stuff, and eventually things come to the surface. So you should probably have an idea of what you're putting in there. So I have read a ton of C.S. Lewis, a ton of G.K. Chesterton, Fulton Sheen, Aquinas, all these sorts of guys. And there is no doubt in my mind that they are affecting what they wrote about is in the DNA of Soulfinder and any other stories that I write. And so, yeah, that's something where consciously, I'm not, consulting the C.S. Lewis pyramid per se, but my guess is many of his writings and G.K. Chesterton and all of these sorts of guys, and even my old Marvel and Spidey and Iron Man and Daredevil, it's all in the DNA of my stories. But again, I'm not consciously turning to a pyramid and saying, oh, I got to make sure it's this specific way and I'm checking off these boxes or anything like that.
Yeah, very interesting. So for you, talking about consuming what you consume insofar as media, what comics have you been reading recently? What have you found that's really hitting scratching that itch for you?
So for the most part, I've just been since I've started doing the Soulfinder stuff, both the books and then the merchandise and iconic and shows, that takes up the vast majority of my time, and even like the research for future books that I'm doing. So I've gotten away for the most part from I used to read Spider-Man, Daredevil, Iron Man. Those are what I always read my entire life, basically up until the pandemic. And then I don't know, I was just like, I gotta cut the ties here, man. Like, this is just, I'm not liking any of this. But I will say I still will keep tabs on Spidey, because I do like Spidey. So, like, how do I say this? Just as a writer, every once in a while, I want to see like what's going on, where are they at. So I checked out like a little bit of the gang war, from like the ASM, and they redid the numbers or whatever, but it's like the 30s or
Mhm.
whatever. And I wanted to see what that was about. And now they're doing like a goblin. I think they're on issue number 53. It's like Spider Goblin or whatever. So it's like I still return to Spidey.
Mhm.
And but then I was telling my wife, and I was like, there's a reason why I stopped. Like, it's because they keep regurgitating. Like, I want to go back to Iron Man. I want to go back to Spidey. I want to go back to Daredevil. Although I actually heard like Daredevil's pretty good. And I heard the ultimate Spider-Man that they're
Oh.
doing where he's the dad. I heard that's actually good, so I might actually check that out. But in the actual just ASM, I feel like it's like, how many times are you going to keep going to the Goblin Well? Like, like, or Gang War, or all of these sorts of things where it's like, I grew up in the 80s, like, reading Gang Wars and all this, all sorts of stuff. And I love the Hobgoblin tales back in the day with like Roger Stern and all these sorts of things. But it's like, they're just, I don't know. I just feel like, I like I said, I will keep tabs on Spidey, and if they ever do something where I feel like they're trying to break the mold or do something original, then maybe I'll pick it up again. But these days, it's just I'll keep tabs on it, and that's about it.
Hmm. So you mentioned you will, I think, this weekend be at Bell County for their Comic Con, or is it next weekend?
The first weekend in August, August
Oh, okay.
3rd and 4th in Bell County Comic Con, I will be there with Timothy Lim and Mark Pellegrini and Eric Canetti and the Kindred Heavens guys. And
Ah,
there
okay.
might be, I don't know how much I'm allowed to say with
You can say it
another
all.
guest. Yeah, I
It's
got to be careful, but there will be announcements on social media and stuff like that. We might have a guest coming from quite far away who's
oh.
connected to Iconic. So, but I don't know if I'm supposed to say that or not. But so yeah, it's I'm looking forward to it. It's gonna be a good time.
So you've been doing this. I think the first time you told me you're going was probably like 2020 or 2021. So how has that experience affected Soulfinder and the way that you write, or has it?
Just going to the different shows in Bell County Comic
Yeah,
Con, or
and meeting people who are interested in Soulfinder.
so the cool thing about going to shows is it demonstrates that there is a whole other world out there that has nothing to do with YouTube, that has nothing to do with Twitter. There are people that go to shows that will buy your books and then become returning readers, or hopefully lifelong readers or whatever, and they have nothing to do with online. And you could go out, and there are people now that I will see at Bell County Comic Con, and they'll be like, I'm here for the new thing. Like, they're not really online. They don't do social media very much, but they will show up to Bell County Comic Con and they'll be like, I'm ready for the new stuff. And they'll buy it from me right there. And so I like that. I like meeting people face to face and having conversations with them. And it's cool to get reactions. So how do I say this? When people are coming that I don't know who they are, I've never met them, I don't know them from social media, know nothing about them. I have to pitch or whatever my book to them, the concept of Soulfinder, and I get to see in real time their reactions to the concept of Soulfinder and what they think and how they react to that in ways where I don't know, I feel like it's good to get out of your little online bubbles where people might just tell you things are good because they like you or they know you, and they're blinded just by their I don't know, their affinity for your social media feed or something like that.
Hmm.
But I like when total strangers are interacting with you and you can see their reactions, you can see their nonverbal body language, how they're reacting to things, what you say about the characters, and they ask you questions, and they just, like I said, they're not kissing your butt, they don't know you, and it's your job. It makes you sharper in terms of knowing your product. When you have no choice, you got to sink or swim to sell to people that don't know you. I feel like it helps you online be able to talk about it when you are face to face with somebody and you have to explain it to them.
Have you ever had somebody sort of provide insights about your book that you hadn't even realized for yourself?
I don't want to say like somebody like that might does that sound like egotistical or weird if I'm like no. No,
No.
it's one of those things. So people have surprised me with how the books have affected them
Mhm.
and in their own personal life. And so when people will tell me that they drifted away from the church and they read the books, and maybe that was the first step towards returning to their faith or whatnot, or maybe they're not even Catholic. Sometimes I'll have people they'll be like, hey, I'm Protestant, but I really like what you're doing. I like your series or whatever. So
Mhm.
like those are interesting interactions. But when people are like, I was going through like a tough time and I'm just making black tide or something like that. And I read it and it really helped me a lot or something like that. Like that is very humbling to see that something that you wrote affected somebody in a positive way. And it actually just further impresses upon me that I how you need to take your vocation seriously, and you have to think seriously about what you're putting in other people's heads, because you are having an effect on them that's greater than you realize. And I don't want to put bad things in people's heads. I don't want to put things in people's heads that will lead them down dark paths. I want to tell them stories that at the end of the day will give them hope and actually put them on a path towards being a better person and more virtuous and loving person. And so I don't want to write stories that are like nihilistic or I don't know, just mired in hopelessness or anything like that. So I don't know. That's just my own personal thing. I know there are other writers out there that want to explore those sorts of things, but
Mhm. Mhm.
I just think that's a bad idea.
Um, you had mentioned being a whole other fandom outside of Twitter and whatnot, and I think the stats are something like 5 or 10% of comic fans are on Twitter. You used to be a lot more prolific on the Twitter. You used to do a lot more videos on YouTube. What do you think is like? To me, it seemed I'm not going to disagree with that, but it does seem like Twitter and YouTube and other social media does have a utility. So how
Mhm.
do you combine what's the best way to combine using those tools to keep in touch with your fan versus like getting lost in the weeds?
Yeah, so I feel like every creator, they basically have to look at the social media landscape and all the platforms that are available to them, and you will quickly kind of figure out what one is going to work best for you and your skill set and your ultimate end goals for your series or whatever, which ones you could leverage the most to do whatever you want to do, however you define success or whatever. And so it could be a situation where, like for me, I like Twitter and allows me to write little longer messages. I'm a writer, so I like to talk about books and the character development and what I think about the craft of storytelling or whatever. Um, and so everyone's just got to figure out like how best to use it, but it's going to be different for everyone. It's a toolbox that you have, and YouTube is a tool, and Twitter is a tool, and Instagram, and Tim and Mark, they're almost never on YouTube, um, and they just kind of like do their Twitter thing, and that's what they do. So what works for me is not going to work for somebody else.
Mhm.
But also that's the other thing is like everybody's goals are different. So some creators, they want to make $1 million, they want to make $10 million or whatever. Others, um, maybe they don't really care about that. Maybe they're writing like for me, um, how do I say this? When I'm writing, I'm like, okay, God made me a writer. That's my vocation. So I am really writing for an audience of one. I'm trying to like give my little thing to God and be like, I do this for you or whatever. And it's like, I'm trying my best or whatever. I hope you like this. Um, and so that's my audience is ultimately some sort of expression of who I am, but also keeping in line that I'm trying to like honor God in the process. And then it's like, if God wants this Soulfinder to get to 1 million people, it's going to get there. If it only gets to 100 people, but it's like, say for some reason, the message saves somebody's life who is going to like, you know, give into depression or something like that. But maybe that was the purpose. Maybe the purpose of writing that book was to get it into that person's hand because that person's going to go on to do great things. And they wouldn't have if they, off themselves or whatever. Or who knows? I don't know. So, but my end goals are going to be completely different than Tim's, and not completely different, but different from Tim's and Mark's. And then name all the different creators. They have their goals. And so you just got to figure out where social media fits into your short and long term, your goals for the book.
Hmm. So we've got Demon's Match, we've got Soulfinder underwater, we've got Ascent up on the mountains, we've got In Tunnels. What can you give us a hint of what's coming up next with Soulfinder?
Yeah, so Soulfinder Volume 5 is going to be a Cold War store and then
Ooh.
Cold War story in the 1980s that takes place on a nuclear submarine. So for people that read Black Tide, there was the Nemesis Nebel, and that was actually kind of part 2 of a 3-part story arc. So I know I'm all going out of order with things, but it's all part of a plan. It's all part of the plan or whatever. So it's like you could read them in any order, but they all connect together. And so the first 6 volumes essentially will complete the first major story arc. And then within that, there's the story of William Nebel, who is this nuclear submarine captain who it's like the initial descent into the abyss, the man that is lost in the abyss, and then ultimately kind of hopelessness and despair clash against each other in volume 6, and then we see what happens with like love versus hate or whatever you want to go when they butt heads, who wins, and that sort of thing. So Soulfinder Volume 5 is all about nuclear submarines and Soviet Union, US, and the stresses that are put on the guys that are part of the silent service. And that will also include people that have read know that there's been a reference to Soulfinder 78, but nobody has ever met him. So they know that Crane is 77, Redder is 79. Who's 78? Volume 5 will include Soulfinder 78. It will tell his tale and also include a young Father Crane as well, as they are on the initial sort of hunt or investigation into William Nebel and the occult happenings on the ship that he is commanding.
And I know some years ago we had talked, and you said you had some other ideas for comics. Have you thought more about doing comics outside of the Soul Finder? Do you think maybe you'll be able to get like 2 a year or 2 series up and running?
Yeah, so I still really, there are a couple other IPs that I would like to develop, but Soulfinder is sort of taken up it's a life of its own, basically.
Mhm.
And so it's one of these things where I, I blink and the day's over, and suddenly you're just like, well, there's no way I'm going to be able to. I got to at least get the first major story arc done. I need to get the first 6 volumes done. And the longer that time goes on, I'm just like, you never know what's going to happen from year to year. So I don't want to start another IP before I at least get the first major arc done, and then we'll see about it. But then it's like all these other stories keep coming up because I have a standalone Detective Chua story that
Ooh.
I'm working on. So I'm doing that. And then there's another, I guess it will be after volume 6. There's a Redder story that I want to tell as well, because at some point in time, Redder needs to almost get out from under the wing of Father Crane as his mentor. And so, without giving too much away, basically, Redder needs to almost strike out on his own, away from Crane, and have his own mission that sort of like is like, no, I am kind of my own soul finder now, or something along those lines. Um, and so there's that story. And so I'm just like, when am I going to find time to do all this? And then on top of that, like, it's like finding an artist who is talent. I'm spoiled with working with Tim and Matt and Eric and these guys, because it's like, I got to find an artist that is talented, who also
Yeah.
wants to work with me, who also has the time to work with me, and the person has to be reliable. And I'm also strange in that, like, I need to click with the person. Like, I can't just do like a weirdo transactional thing where it's like you're a hired gun bounty hunter artist just doing a script. Like, so I slowly get to know people. So like the past one, I got to know Rodrigo Aviles.
Mhm.
He did the cover for Tunnel Hounds, and he did the color work. And so it's like I start these relationships with people, and then once I trust them, and if it's like we're on the same page, then it's like, it's just a slow process for me. Whereas other people will just find artists and they pay them or do whatever. And but it's like, no, I gotta actually like the guys that I'm working with, and I am just very slow in terms of getting to know somebody and getting to trust them. And then but then it's like, once you trust them and once you're cool, then it's like, all right, let's do cool stuff together. It's like I think of it like when you're kids and you put on movies with your friends and like little plays in the neighborhood. And it
Mhm.
was just that, like, let's just do cool stuff together. Let's like come up with cool stories. And like, I want it to be basically like kind of that childlike innocence almost thing, but you're an adult now and there is a business element to it, but we're still just friends that are doing like really cool stuff together.
Ah, very cool. Do you think that maybe you will ever get to a point where you have somebody writing some of these stories for you? So, like, for example, maybe the detective to a story or whatnot, where you collaborate with another writer. I mean, not in the same way as Tim and Mark, but like on your specific IPs.
So far the only people that I would trust is Tim and Mark. And there's been a couple of times where I'm just like, would Tim be mad if I hired Mark to like do a Soul Finder story or something like that? I don't think Tim would care or whatever, but it's one of those things where it's like, yeah, like I said, I'm just like a very guarded, I admit it, I own up to it, like I'm a very guarded guy. And I would only trust very few people, and I know Mark and Tim would do a really good job. And but outside them right now, I can't think of anybody that I would want to tackle Soulfinder.
All right. So, everyone, Soul Finder, you can find it. There is links in the descriptions. You could see Doug in a few weeks in at the Bell County Comic Con down in Texas. Um, Anything else you have coming up or would like to announce?
No, Bell County Comic Con is basically always the big event of the year. There might be, random other shows kind of like pop up, and I'm open to doing those before the end of the year if that happens. But Bell County Comic Con is the main one, first weekend in August, August 3rd and 4th. So there's that. But also, I want to make sure I thank you for inviting me on to talk about Soulfinder Ton of Hounds. I had a great time, and you ask awesome questions.
Oh, thank you.
So I appreciate that as well.
All right. And so, everyone, tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. Eastern, special early show. I have CJ Leung. You might know him from the Cool History Bros channel. And he also has a gaming channel. He is coming on to talk about Cloudbreaker Alliance, his tabletop role playing game. It's been 1 year since it came out. They've been doing a lot of fine tuning on it. We're also going to talk about the difference in how you do world building for tabletop role playing games versus other media, and why it's different, and also the difference between Eastern and Western storytelling.
Cool.
Then Thursday evening, 9:30, I will be on Comic Book Radio on Peter Smetty's channel talking about my campaign guide for Empire of the Undying Sun. That's a campaign guide for Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition. It will be officially launching in September. Come check it out. A lot of great stuff with that. Saturday, I will be on the Dungeon Delvers channel for the Nerd Council of Doom. And next week, Tuesday, I will have Tyler Draw and Talk. We're going to be talking about, he's got a new book out called Bullet Assassin. So we'll talk about that and more guests to come.
Cool, man.
So thanks a lot for coming, Doug.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
And good night, everyone.